Hello everybody and welcome to another edition of All My Movies. We are continuing 90s action movie week with Michael Bay's second feature film, one of my favorite 90s action movies, one of my favorite action movies of all time, The Rock, from the summer of 1996, starring Nicolas Cage, Sean Connery, and Ed Harris. We are going to talk about this movie extensively, and I say we because my guest today is my Schmoedown teammate and action movie enthusiast, Ben Bateman, perhaps known as Ben the Boss Bateman to many of you. But of course, as always, I do want to set the tone, set the stage, give you a little information about the background of this movie before we get into that discussion. But before we get to that, I want to thank you for watching the show if you're watching us on YouTube, and listening to us if you are an audio subscriber. If you want to help the show grow, if you're watching us on YouTube, you can subscribe to the audio podcast. That link is down below in the description. And if you're listening to us and you want to see the video portion of the show, you can find it on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Dan Murrell Movies. The Rock began as a spec script that was optioned by Disney from writers David Weisberg and Douglas Cook. And as is the reality with so many movies back then and still today, it was rewritten by a succession of other writers, including Aaron Sorkin and reportedly Quentin Tarantino. And each successive writer contributed an important part of what would become the DNA of the final movie.
And we brought in Mark Rosner, who did a very good job on changing some of the characters and embellishing some of the characters. And we made the villain kind of black. He wasn't black and white. He was more gray. He had very honorable intentions, just using the wrong means. Jonathan Hensleigh came in, and he kind of gave us those great moments. He worked out a lot of the really tough stuff with the missiles and the green balls, and just really put his heart and soul and gave us huge movie moments.
Writer Jonathan Hensleigh's work was so extensive and so important to the script that when his name was left off of the finished movie due to a process in the Writers Guild called arbitration, the director of The Rock would write an open letter to the media criticizing the process and calling it a sham and a travesty. As the script was being reworked, producer Jerry Bruckheimer set his sights on the director he wanted to helm the action movie, and it was a director that he had just worked with in 1995's Bad Boys, starring Martin Lawrence and Will Smith, Michael Bay. Michael Bay was a hot commodity in Hollywood at the time. He was a fresh young director with a hit under his belt, and that's all you need to get some real heat in the Hollywood community. And Bruckheimer explains in this interview with Charlie Rose what he had to promise Bay in order to get him on board.
We told Michael, we made the last one with you, Bad Boys. We're going to make this one. We'll get you a great cast. We promise you that. And somehow we're going to fix the script. We're going to make this whole thing work.
Next on the list was securing a cast, and this was done by producers Jerry Bruckheimer and, in their last collaboration together, Don Simpson. Bruckheimer and Simpson had a lucrative producing career together, but their partnership dissolved in late 1995, preceding Simpson's death in early 1996. And even though Simpson's involvement with The Rock did not continue throughout the film, the two of them did start the casting process together. And as FBI chemical weapons expert Stanley Goodspeed, the pair set their eyes on an established Hollywood actor, a name, but not the first person you think of when you think action movie, Nicolas Cage.
But we hung in there for Nick, I would say, for 2.5 months, just trying to negotiate without going to another actor. We knew nothing about leaving Las Vegas. I didn't know about leaving Las Vegas till a week before it came out. Nick didn't even talk about it.
Cage wanted to bring an everyman quality to the character of Goodspeed, and in that vein, he wanted to stay away from a mainstay in R-rated action filmmaking, foul language, as he explains in this interview with MTV in 1996.
I said I want him to be a chemist who's a professor who loves his job and is a peaceful man and doesn't want to swear. No matter what you do, you can't bring me to that point where I'm going to swear. How in the name of Zeus's butthole is one of the ways to do it. You just take an extinct god, and then add the word butthole. Or I want to cut the chit-chat a-hole.
Cage's character was set to team up with an American secret agent who had once been imprisoned in Alcatraz, but the producing team also set their sights on casting a living legend to play John Mason, Sean Connery. And landing Connery meant taking extensive notes from the actor on the character that he wanted to play in the film.
Sean took his character and raised it to another level. It was his idea to have the character be a British agent that was caught behind the lines and then rolled over and forgotten by his own government. And the Kennedy tapes and the Hoover tapes with Kennedy, and it was all Sean's idea.
When it came time to shoot the film, Michael Bay won an important battle. He fought the studio to shoot as much of The Rock on The Rock, something that I think really brings a real authenticity to the finished film?
I wanted to shoot on Alcatraz. The studio wanted me to shoot some pretty pictures there for 3 days, and I went on a tour, and my mouth dropped open, and I said, we got to shoot.
This is the place.
We got to shoot half the movie here.
This is where I usually get into an intensive breakdown of the movie, and we're going to do this, but this week I'm doing it with my special guest, Ben Bateman. If you don't know him from the Schmoedown, you may know him as part of Action Industries. He's been breaking down action movies for years at this point. This is a movie that he and I have talked about a lot, and so this is kind of a co-breakdown. It's not just an interview. We're going to talk about the entire cast, Ed Harris, the plot, everything about this movie that's great, a few things about this movie that aren't so great. So let's get right into my discussion as we continue to break down The Rock with my guest, Ben Bateman. When I decided to make this the focus of the show, there was one name that jumped to mind, and it's mainly because when I told him I was doing an episode about this show, he said, you have to bring me on, and I agreed. He is known for his love, his enthusiasm of action movies. He's been on Team Action in the Schmoedown. He helps run Action Industries, so his middle name is Action. He also happens to be my current partner in the Movie Trivia Schmoedown, the other half of Danger Zone. I'm very happy, and we have talked about this movie just between the two of us so many times. I'm happy to actually get it on tape. Ben Bateman, what's up, man?
Dan, I'm so excited to talk about this movie. Now, I have to have seen this movie, I don't know, 30, 40 times in my life probably. It's one of my earliest memories, but I watched it again last night to make sure that I was and I caught new things, which is the most exciting feeling when you're in your 30s and you watch one of your favorites and you still get new things.
I love that. We've talked. That's happened on the show so many times. I'll watch a movie that I know, like even Jaws, which I've seen 50 times probably. Sometimes I'll be watching it and I'll see this new thing. I'll notice this something I've never noticed before, and it's just like this adrenaline rush. Like you're still finding new stuff. I remember you and I and Andrew Guy once were having a discussion on your channel. And I mentioned that I loved this movie, and I think Guy was like shocked. He's like, "What?" I think some people might be surprised that I like this movie because I think there's this perception that I have some kind of highfalutin taste. But yeah. I will argue that The Rock is not an ironically good movie. The Rock is legitimately a great action movie.
Oh, I think it's just a legitimately great movie. I think that The Rock exists in this zone. It's one of the reasons that Drew and I on Action talked so much about the 5 Tony Scott Denzel movies, because they all have the same sort of functional. There's these really great dramatic moments buried between pretty thrilling action sequences, and then 20% of the movie is like silly one-liners and stuff that like kind of loses the grounded nature. And that's what The Rock basically is you have these moments where you're like, if this movie was being made today by somebody who didn't want to do that stuff, you would cut out that one-liner and you'd cut out this scene and it would be 25 minutes shorter, and it, like a lot of that stuff would just be gone and the movie would just be better. But the fact that 80% of it is not that stuff is what makes this movie legitimately good.
Yeah, it's such a mix of the ridiculous and then like even sometimes scene to scene. It goes from crazy over the top, Nicolas Cage doing whatever in the hell he's doing in this movie, Sean Connery being Sean Connery, kind of wacky, almost cartoonish violence, and then this very grounded story about, finding honor for Hummel's fallen son. And they shouldn't work together. This should be very dissonant. This should be like watching two different movies, and yet I think it's because of just Bay's style. I think Michael Bay's style works for this kind of movie. Somehow it works together.
I can tell you that when we used to do Action Movie Anatomy, we did 250 episodes of that show, and for every week for almost 5 years. And we had 3 categories at the end of every episode. There was which category does the movie fit into? Is it totally ridiculous, totally legitimate, or the middle category was ridiculously legitimate? And you'd always hope that the movies would fit the middle because that was the best category. And if you were going to explain to somebody what that meant, it was that the movie has tons of over-the-top stuff, so it is absurd. It loses you at points. But it also has moments that are like really dramatic. But the one thing that makes it that category is it has to have something that's sort of in the middle of this crazy action movie that feels like it could belong in an Oscar-winning drama. It's usually a performance. That tends to be what it is. Sometimes it's like a really magnetic single plot line or an idea or a score. In this movie, for me, it is Ed Harris as General Hummel, no question. He could have been nominated for an Oscar for this movie, I think, and it would have been fine.
20 of them were left to rot outside Baghdad after the conflict ended. No benefits were paid to their families. No medals conferred.
The way that we usually do the show is I'll do the rundown of the movie, and then we'll bring on the guest when I have a guest, so we just kind of talk about the movie. But you and I have talked about this movie, and I know that you know this movie like the back of your hand.
Oh, yeah.
That we're just going to run down the movie together because it starts with Ed Harris. The movie starts. It is, again, if you take the first 2 minutes of The Rock out here, you might be thinking that this is like an Oscar bait drama. You have the mournful music, the rain, the funeral, the voiceover. This movie opens like a serious drama, and that's because Ed Harris is working at a level completely his own in this movie.
He's bought into this character and to this story in a way that no one, and I wouldn't even say that no one else is trying to. It's just that Ed Harris is like legitimately the guy, and it's funny that Cage and Connery have both won Oscars and Harris hasn't. It just feels like he's the guy that's in the art house drama that steals the show. He's so intense. I mean, the movie literally opens with Ed Harris walking up to a grave, and he looks at the grave and he solemnly says, "I miss you so much." And you're like, all right, I'm in. He cares about this grave. I need to know what's happening.
I miss you so much. There's something I've got to do, Barb. Something I couldn't do while you were here.
Well, you talk about this intensity. I was looking at, because I always go over the special features, and one of the things that's on my Blu-ray copy of The Rock there's some outtakes, and usually the outtakes are like zany bloopers, but then the outtakes in this movie are like Ed Harris like messing up and just screaming, like slamming scenery down, kicking stuff, cursing, and it's just like he seems like the most terrifying person in the world.
God willing, within the next 48 hours, you will evacuate this island undercover. God damn it! By your 9th birthday, I was running black ops into China. My men were...
Oh my goodness, he is over the top in the best possible way.
So you have this intense Ed Harris thing. Then you go into this sort of heist thing, and then it's like a body horror movie because they're stealing this VX gas from this naval weapons depot, and you have to set the stakes. And this movie does set the stakes very early on. You have the canister break, and then you got this guy who like he melts. He melts on screen, and I remember I saw this movie. I couldn't see rated R movies when I was a kid, so I was 13 when this movie came out. I was maybe 14, but I remember I was with my mom. We were on a trip somewhere. I don't even remember where we were, but they had this, the SpectraVision in the hotel room where you could rent the blockbusters of today, and one of them was The Rock, and I somehow convinced my mom to rent The Rock, which she hadn't seen. Usually she had to have seen the rated R movie. And we got to that part, and I could tell immediately that she had regretted that decision because that is hardcore. Like, that is intense.
So this movie came out in 1996. I went to see it. I don't recall if I saw it in theaters. I think I didn't, to be honest. My friend Nick Hathaway, who lived locally, he lived on a houseboat. And I went to see him. We would hang out every once in a while. And we rented this from like Hollywood Video or something. We watched it on his TV on his houseboat. And the movie finished. We looked at each other and we're like, what should we do? And we were like, let's just watch it again. And we put it on and we watched it a second time. And like, I've always had like the deepest love affair with this movie. Like, I feel like I probably watch it every year or two, it seems like. And that stuff you're talking about, the body horror stuff, and specifically the heist sequence, I have certain visuals from that sequence that are like, they're like tattooed on my brain. Like there's that moment when they're walking past the pillar and that guy like cartoonishly pops up with the green face paint and he like turns around and shoots the two dudes. Like I remember that scene like in my dreams. Like as a little kid, I was like, that's what it's like to do a heist. You pop up with two guns. Like, yeah, it's just the best.
So we've now set who the, I don't even know if he's the villain. I mean, I guess he's technically the villain. He's the antagonist to a point, although the other guys really become the real antagonists of the movie. But then, okay, so you have to meet our heroes. And one of the things that movies don't do as much anymore, action movies always do this. They give your hero, and I guess it's meant to humanize them. You give your hero like a little bit of business. Like a thing that's just like doesn't really have any consequence, but it's like, this guy's quirky. And so we meet Goodspeed, played by Nicolas Cage, who was hot off of winning an Academy Award for leaving Las Vegas.
First one that comes out after he wins for Las Vegas. Yeah.
So right off an Academy Award win. One of the craziest performances in an action movie ever. But what I love is that they introduce him by just as like, I'm a Beatlemaniac. Like for some reason they decide it's important for us to know that Stanley Goodspeed loves the Beatles.
Why don't you just spend $13 on a CD, man?
First of all, it's because I'm a Beatlemaniac. And second, these sound better.
Well, and it's even just this energy that he brings to it, because you have this thing, you have the doll, and the gas, and it's this very 90s, specifically 80s, 90s action movie thing where you have to have like a false action beat in the first 20 minutes because apparently people they're gonna walk out of the theater or something. I don't know.
It's like how Speed opens, like many.
Exactly. You gotta have some kind of a crisis, but it's even when he goes home and he brings, and that's what I think makes this movie one of the things that makes it so memorable is he's got this energy that is so unique to this movie.
Stanley, at the time you said it 7.5 seconds ago.
Well, gosh, kind of a lot's happened since then. Look, we're not even married.
I think part of it is if you put any two lead actors in this movie, I don't think it works as well. It's just that Nic Cage works on his own frequency. Sean Connery is Sean freaking Connery. I mean, he's the epitome of cool, and then Ed Harris above all of them on his level of energy. It somehow makes this stew that works for some reason.
Yeah, one of the things I remember asking a friend of mine years ago who worked on this movie, I remember asking him what he thought it was that made those 90s action movies elevated in a way that like non-IP today doesn't really seem to be elevated in the same way. And he was like, it was the producers hiring the best possible actors to play these roles. It was that they would go after people they all were Oscar winners. They were trying to get like the most trained, committed people in these roles. And you realize that they sort of try to do the same thing nowadays, but they also try to make the movies that have Ryan Gosling and Oscar Isaac like more legitimate in some way. Whereas this movie is very clear in terms of it's a Michael Bay movie. Like we're going to talk about all the different sort of like cinematic shots and moments that are iconic, but these are things that only Michael Bay does. And he continued to do it in stuff like Transformers. He just wasn't hiring the same caliber of actor anymore. He wasn't trying to get those people.
We have what would be the inciting incident in the other movie. It just happens to come like 30 minutes in this movie, which is where we should probably meet Hummel and everybody else, which is he comes in with his guys to Alcatraz. We meet Ranger Bob.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Broadway.
What's the matter, fellas? Something wrong with the tour?
Tour's over, Bob.
Another thing that I love about these movies is there's always these characters that are on screen for like 1 minute. Like the guy in the car in Speed that Keanu Reeves, he steals his car. Like you have these like little mini movies inside, and you meet these tiny little characters. So we have Ranger Bob, who I always thought, do you know So I Married an Axe Murderer, the movie?
Yeah.
I always wanted a shared universe movie. We can't have it now with Ranger Bob and then Phil Hartman.
Now this is something the other tour guides won't tell you. In this particular cell block, Machine Gun Kelly had what we call in the prison system a bitch.
Almost got his Hans Gruber moment.
It's not our intention in any way to harm you. You will not be detained 1 minute longer than is necessary for us to complete our mission.
But this is what I think works. This is what I think makes him a great, again, if you want to call him a villain, he's definitely an antagonist to a point, is you get why he's doing it. He's got a noble reason for doing what he's doing.
These men died for their country and they weren't even given a goddamn military burial.
From these funds, reparations of $1 million will be paid to each of the 83 Marines' families.
He's got several monologues throughout the film that really sell you on the cause. And he sells those monologues in a way that almost like no actor alive, I think, would be able to. Every time one of his scenes ends, I feel like it always ends and you think to yourself, like, I mean, I can understand buying into this guy's cause because, like, he is just so committed and so charismatic, and he seems like he's doing it all with honor. They really carefully throw in these little moments where it's like, those darts are going to wear off in 30 minutes, like, right? Like a non-lethal strike. Or like, hey, girls, I need you to do something for me. Can you get back on? Right? He does all those moments so that you're like, okay, he's not really a bad guy. But also, the thing that I think makes him such a compelling character for me is that because of his service record, because of how decorated he is, that we find out in a minute in the hero qualifier, which is one of the best moments of the whole movie. But when you do find out, you realize that everybody looks at him with this level of esteem that's like, could you or I ever achieve anything in our lives that we would walk into a room with the kind of aura that Hummel walks around in the world with, where you're like, you may be doing something criminal, but we understand there has to be a reason. You're too honorable and tactical for this to truly be an act of terrorism. I'll give you that credit.
Their families are told fairy tales about what happened to them. Well, I have choked on these lies my entire career. Well, here and now, the lies stop.
This is my favorite Michael Bay movie by a pretty wide margin. I don't think he ever achieved, and I would honestly say that the reason is because he didn't have Ed Harris. I mean, I think that most of what makes this movie as special as it is the big three. But I think it's that particular performance stands above anything else he's ever done in any movie in the rest of his career. It's a more special, memorable thing to me than anything in Armageddon, anything in Transformers, you know.
Well, it's part of what makes Die Hard so memorable, which is that Die Hard, if you have Die Hard and you have Bruce Willis doing Bruce Willis stuff, and then every time you cut to away from Bruce Willis, they had just cast an actor who was, you know, fine. He was Hans Gruber. He was the terrorist leader, and you would just have this kind of filler scene where, well, you know, McClane can't be on this camera all the time, so we have to cut to the villain sometimes. You know, he's okay. But the fact that I think what makes this movie, it's because every time you cut away from Connery and Cage, who are great to watch on screen, to a scene that in the hands of a lesser actor would have been just kind of obligatory villain stuff, it's just like entrancing because it's Ed Harris and he's doing what he does.
You made a terrible mistake, and more of our brothers have died in vain. Damn you for forcing me into this position.
The thing that he also has that actually both sides have in common, and we'll talk about the good guys in a minute, but he's got a squad, which is like, again, when you talk about best actors for the role, these aren't nobodies. You've got David Morse, who's a great dramatic actor.
Incredible.
You've got Tony Todd, obviously. I forgot until I watched this one that Bokeem Woodbine is one of the guys.
Yeah, young Bokeem Woodbine role. You've got John C. McGinley in there running around.
That's right, yeah. And then you have like the other thing that you see, Independence Day was great at this too. You have the inside, the subset of the good guys. You have the bad guys inside the good guys. So in this one, it's John Spencer, who, of course, I love him from The West Wing, which is weird for me to see because it's a similar role, but he's Womack, who's just a real slime ball.
You're on a need-to-know basis, and you don't need to know.
So now you know who both of these guys are. You have the stakes, which is they got hostages at the Rock. They've got the poison gas. 1 teaspoon of this stuff will wipe out 8 city blocks. You know what's going on. We need a chemical specialist. Of course, who are you going to call in? You're going to call in Agent Goodspeed, who we've established is the best the FBI has to offer.
This isn't a training exercise, is it?
No, Dr. Goodspeed, it's not a training exercise.
Also, one thing that I think we haven't really addressed yet is the power of the device that the VX gas, like that device in this movie, they seem like the worst thing imaginable. They seem worse than a nuclear bomb. Yeah. Like, they're terrifying. And I think the fact that they are bright green and they're in this string of pearls and they're inside the rockets, there's just something about that device that drives the whole movie and does truly make the stakes feel insane.
1 teaspoon of this shit detonated in the atmosphere will kill every living organism in an 8-block radius.
He's both completely suited for the task, but like he thinks he's going to show somebody how to do it, and then it's like, oh no, we're going to send you, and then like so it's weird. Like they're able to make it so that he's both the only person for the job and a complete fish out of water, right. which is kind of the opposite of what Mason is. So this is where we get to Mason, played by Sean Connery. I mean, I would say. I know some people may like Finding Forrester. I'd say probably the last great role of Sean Connery's career.
Yeah,
I mean, like iconic Sean Connery role, you know?
If you think about his career in terms of like parts, you have like the James Bond era, and he's in stuff throughout that era too. You have the like 80s, is he still a leading man? And he's in movies, but not as many that matter, but he does get his Oscar.
Yeah.
There's a quick lull, and then there's his, basically, I wouldn't even say it starts with Crusade. It kind of starts with this movie, actually, and he rips off a few there. It's like this, he does Entrapment, he's got League, he's got Finding Forrester. There's a few really good ones in there, you know, and this is the last great one, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think Crusade probably ends the Untouchables era of his career, and like this is like the last rocket blast to the moon, like back on top, #1 movies, and then, you know, he retired and stayed retired, which you don't see very often. So you got Connery. Have you heard about this theory? And I found it on, like, somebody put together this comprehensive theory that
James Bond
was,
theory, right?
Yeah, that basically was able to merge this timeline and the James Bond timeline to say that, like, he is the cinematic James Bond that we've seen in the movies.
Oh, I was trained by the best British intelligence.
I mean, take intention out. He basically is. I mean, he's the ladies' man. He's got the skills. He's a killer. I mean, he essentially is James Bond. It's just you can't call him James Bond. You call him James Mason. I'm a sucker for a good interrogation room scene. I know it's used a lot, but it does a lot to establish sort of the character of a person. You get, how smart he is and just, the smart ass nature of him. And then it's a great way for him to meet Goodspeed, because you have this kind of back and forth. And I love this false bravado that Goodspeed does, like, can we unlock the passage? Can we get his handcuffs off, please? Can we get a cup of coffee? Just like the fact that he's totally not the alpha in the room.
Offer me coffee.
Oh, yes. Well, that was, in fact, going to be my next... Can we get a cup of coffee in here, please?
It's a great interrogation scene. My feeling with this movie, and I don't know if you share this opinion, is that the most cuttable sequence of this entire movie is pretty much the car chase. It's the only part of the movie that when I watch it, I'm always like, this doesn't really do anything for the movie other than just add one more action sequence, and I don't really need it. And so I kind of would almost rather just go from the interrogation scene into their going to the Rock. But this particular scene where you see him with the long hair and they're interacting, and then with like the quarter and the glass, like all that stuff is great. That's all really wonderful stuff.
Womack. Why am I not surprised, you piece of shit?
Yeah, there are two sequences in this movie that I don't think are necessary. We'll get to the other one later. It does give us, inside of that San Francisco car chase, we get the bay shot. We get the circling around Nic Cage shot, but I think we could have gotten that elsewhere. I'm not afraid to acknowledge flaws, and I will say I think that's a good 20 minutes in this movie right there that could just go out the window, and you're not going to really lose much.
What do you say we cut the chit-chat? A-hole!
We'll continue our journey deep into the heart of Alcatraz in just a moment, but first, a word from our sponsor. This episode is sponsored by Munk Pack, who makes snacks that taste like your favorite sugary treats, but with 1 gram of sugar or less. Munk Pack Keto Nut and Seed Bars contain 1 gram or less of sugar, 2 to 3 grams of net carbs, and are only 150 calories. They're great for people that are trying to eat better, cut back on those calories, or just have an overall healthier lifestyle without sacrificing taste. What's great is that I can keep these bars in the pantry right with everything else that tastes great. I can grab one. I love all of the flavors, and it is satisfying. It fills me up. It's a quick eat. It's healthier than most everything else that I would have grabbed for anyway, and it's something that can keep me going throughout the day. They also come in great flavors like sea salt dark chocolate, caramel sea salt, and peanut butter dark chocolate. That one is my favorite. The combination of those two flavors with the great texture is really what I go for, but you really can't go wrong no matter which flavor you choose. No matter what your situation is, it's a great snack on the go, and they are gluten-free, plant-based, and non-GMO with no soy, trans fat, sugar, alcohols, or artificial colors. And if you take a liking to one of the flavors like I have, you can also sign up to get subscribed to your favorite flavor so that you never run out. And if you do that, you get 10% off of every order that you subscribe to keep you restocked with snacks that are healthy and make you feel good. Try it for yourself and you'll see. And I have a special deal for my listeners. Get 20% off your first purchase of any Munk Pack product by visiting monkpack.com and entering our promo code MOVIES at checkout. And Munk Pack is so confident with their product, it's backed with a 100% satisfaction guarantee. So if you don't like it for any reason, they will exchange the product or refund your money, whichever you prefer. To get started, just go to monkpack.com. That's MUNKPACK.com and select any product. Then enter the code MOVIES at checkout to save 20% off your purchase. Munk Pack, delicious, nutritious food you can count on, and I'd like to thank them for sponsoring the show.
Show us on the blueprints.
I can't. My blueprint was in my head.
So after this diversion, we're back on track. We're going to the Rock, and then we meet our second squad. So we've got Hummel's squad. Now we've got the squad of Marines that are going out there to the Rock, led by Michael Biehn. Maybe one of the most underappreciated actors ever.
Commander Anderson in this movie is such a legend. He shows up. I used to run this fantasy football league. I guess I still do, but we used to do drafts at 6 a.m. at the bar we worked at, so we had to get the bar, and they'd let us use it from 6 to 10 on the weekend before. And I would give this speech at 6:01 before the draft started, and I would always rip lines from my favorite movie speeches. And so I totally used that line one year where it's,
"Make no mistake, gentlemen, we are in the fight of our lives against maybe the greatest battalion commander in the Vietnam War. I shit you not."
So we get to the Rock. You have the most, and again, this is where I talk a lot about when you're watching a movie, sometimes you just have to acknowledge that it's a movie. Because if you want 100% reality, or if you're taken out completely of a movie by something that's not 100% real, then you're not going to enjoy any movie, because there's a certain amount of unreality that you have to accept. For this movie, it's the fact that Alcatraz would have an open outside entrance that is a completely useless labyrinth of rotating wheels, flames going at different timing. None of that makes sense whatsoever, but it's really cool.
He timed it, and he remembers it 30 years later. This guy's got to be a genius.
Welcome to the Rock.
The only thing that I understand why you have to do it, because, well, I almost feel like if you hadn't spent so much time with the San Francisco scene earlier that I don't think really adds a whole lot, you could have spent more time with the Marines, because that's the only thing that I don't like. Is I like these guys. You have a great cast, and yet almost immediately after they get into the Rock, you have the shower room scene where they trip the sensors. The Marines are down below, Hummel's guys are up above, and then you have this incredible back and forth between Ed Harris and Michael Biehn. That's, again, it's its own little mini movie in the middle of this movie.
You tell your men to safety their weapons, drop them on the deck.
I cannot give that order!
I am not going to repeat that order!
I will not give that order!
What the hell is wrong with you, man?
Stand fast!
It is the single best sequence in the movie, in my opinion. It's the most memorable scene. It's always the thing that I come back to. And the exchange between Harris and Biehn, I cannot give that order, stand down! Like, that's so good. And it also sets up, like, the music that's playing, the shootout, that cut when Danny Nucci comes up, and it cuts to Michael Biehn, who's already been shot, and he's like on his side, and he pulls out the gun, he's like, yeah! Like, as a kid watching that, I was like, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen in my life. Plus, you've got the weird shot where it cuts to Tony Todd, and he's like, and he's like laughing as he's killing the guys. Like, it's just like so intense. It sets up that Sporleader and Todd are just so clearly like the evil mercenaries. Let's waste these fuckers.
The idea, like, Michael Biehn, one of the reasons he's so good is, like, he's so earnest. Like, he brought the same thing to Kyle Reese, which is just like, he gives his performances like such 100% commitment. You believe every word that's coming out of his mouth, that when he's just like,
but like you, I swore to defend this country against all enemies, foreign, sir, and domestic.
It's also tragic as a kid because you want the good guys to win.
Yeah.
This was one of the moments as a kid I can remember watching a movie for the first time where I was just like heartbroken. I was like, how all the heroes die? All the good guys die? What?
It's very interesting the way that movies do this, because I remember this concept of things not being fair. I remember watching Mystery Men when it came out back in 1999, and there's the scene where, like, the whole movie they're trying to keep Greg Kinnear's superhero character from dying. And, he's like invincible. He's like Superman. And, he's an a-hole. He's definitely an a-hole, but still he's like good. And and Jeffrey Rush is bad. And then there's this scene where, like, the good guys push the wrong button and this thing comes down and it just deforms Greg Kinnear's face and he's dead. He's just gone. I mean, I know it sounds weird to like, oh, Mystery Men opened my eyes up to the reality of life. But it is, in a fictional way, it did in a really weird way, because this movie, it's kind of similar where these guys, you think maybe a couple of them should make it through because they're good guys, and yet they get just wiped off the map immediately, instantly.
There are scenes that I think sort of objectively are effective in movies. It's one of the things that I think as a critic, you sometimes have to step outside of yourself to remember, like, maybe I'm jaded, or maybe this is affecting me in a way because I'm watching this for the first time in my 30s. But, like, there are scenes in movies that I can remember watching as a child. The horse sinking into the quicksand in Never Ending Story comes to mind. Mm-hmm. The opening sequence to Up, which I wasn't a kid when it came out, but I mean, like, I was younger. That just, like, the first time you watch them, you're like, well, I mean, I'll never forget this. Like, I'll never forget the first time I saw the shower room shootout, because I couldn't imagine in my mind that the good guys were all going to not get, like, taken down. They were all going to die. They all get shot to death. None of the bad guys die. It's like a horrifying scene if you're, 9 or however old I was when I watched it.
So, but what this does do, and I think what the function of it, though, does, is it sets up Connery and Cage.
You sure you're ready for this?
I'll do my best.
Your best. Losers always whine about their best.
Which I love they put that part in the trailer, but not the second part.
Winners go home and f*** the prom queen.
Carla was the prom queen.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, like that interaction's incredible. All their stuff. One thing, our friend Brendan Meyer was in a film with Cage last year or 2 years ago called Color Out of Space, and I was asking him just a little bit about Cage and like working with him and some of the stuff, and what he told me was like, when you work with him, you actually see a lot of the stuff that creates the like Zeus's butthole and those weird deliveries, because he's so free as an actor in the moments to try whatever, literally whatever comes to mind for him. He's just not inhibited at all. He doesn't feel any like, if I say this is weird, people will judge me. Is this going to work? Like he just tries it and he tries it and he tries it, and eventually they find one that they like. And I think it's kind of one of the charming things about him. But the difference between him trying that in like 2017 and trying that in like 1996 after winning an Oscar is that like after winning an Oscar, everyone's probably like, do whatever, bro. Like, you're a genius. So like, go get it done. And like, he's just continued to do a lot of that same wild stuff throughout his entire career. And I think that in itself is kind of a testament to, I guess, I don't know if we'd call it the genius of Nic Cage, but it creates a lot of his most memorable stuff, you know, and that's what a lot of those interactions with Mason are. I think the fact that he goes for the character that he does in this movie is one of the things that makes it the movie that it is. It's such a unique thing.
You know, I like history too, and maybe when this is all over, you and I can stop by the souvenir shop together. But right now, I want to find some rockets.
Now we get to the end game, which is, and I like that this movie does this, because you don't just have a villain or an antagonist or whatever you want to call Hummel, you understand why he's doing what he's doing, but you have basically he does have a limit.
This mission was based on the threat of force. I'm not about to kill 80,000 innocent people. Do you think I'm out of my fucking mind?
And then you realize that the real bad guys on this island are not him. It's everyone else.
Order the launch, General.
Come on, General. Let's be all we can be.
They do something that they kill the bad. They kill what you think is the primary antagonist 30 minutes before the movie's over, which is I think is kind of surprising, to be honest. It's a star like Ed Harris. You don't expect that he's going to go out that early, and yet he's gone.
Oh, God, what have I done? Where's the last rocket? Lower lighthouse. Lower lighthouse. Go.
So now you have basically this revolving series of, you know, it's like a video game. You got to get through each one of these bosses. I love the Rocket Man gag.
Do you like the Elton John song Rocket Man?
I don't like soft ass shit.
Well, I only bring it up because it's you. You're the Rocket Man.
Oh, Tony Todd. I love that he's got like 2 deaths. Like he gets the double death, which you know you're a bad guy in an action movie if you get the double death. He gets taken out of the window by the rocket, which is in its own amazing. Like if that had been the way he went out, that'd be great. And then he gets the dropping off the rocket impaled on a spike death.
He gets the double death, and then it does set up the final, the spore leader with the thing in the mouth and the adrenaline. Like that's another one of those things as a kid that I'll never forget, is when he smashes it in his mouth after you've already seen the guy melt earlier. You're like, that is crazy.
Oh, this is gonna be really bad because and then he's got like, I mean, they really make a meal out of it because he like comes up, he's like frothing, it's like just foaming coming out of his mouth, and then Goodspeed stabs himself in. Listen, I'm no scientist, but just anatomically. And I don't know why nobody brought this up. Wherever Nic Cage / Stanley Goodspeed stabs himself, it is most definitely not his heart. It's
like here.
It's like underneath his sternum. It's like maybe the upper part of his intestine, but it works. So, you know, he survives, which I guess is the point.
They also don't explain ever what the giant syringe is or how it works in a way that I can like understand, because like you're telling me that if you breathe or get any of this stuff on your skin, you like spit your guts out and spasm so bad you break your back, but it's already in the air as this guy is frothing everywhere. And if you inject yourself in the heart, it totally invalidates the poison. Like it doesn't affect you at all. Like, I never got that.
There's a physiological reality to being exposed to this gas that I don't quite know what the injection in the heart really does for you, other than maybe keep your heart beating while you're writhing in agony as your face melts off. But again, it's the thing with the movies. Like, you're going to go with it or you're not. And what it really does is it just sets up, like, again, when you talk about 90s action shots, one of the best, you know, the green flares, coming out to call off the airstrike so that they're not going to bomb Alcatraz, to vaporize with this experimental thermite that they've been developing. But then just this great shot of like Cage screaming with the flares, and they drop the bomb, and it just like coming up out of the ground and the explosion. I mean, again, that is pure 90s, pure Bay. I've been talking about summer of 96. This has come up a lot of times. Last week we talked about a movie that came out in 96. We talked about Twister a few weeks ago. Like, this was a really great merging this summer of like technology and like old school filmmaking, because that sequence, this shot with the CG and stuff, like there's obviously some assistance with computer graphics and stuff, but it wasn't all digital. It didn't look fake still. It was actually being able to like do things like that shot coming up with the explosion and stuff that like, yeah, you could not do that practically before, but you're still mixing in enough practical that it just marries each other, and it looks really awesome.
Yeah, and it's also like the total like, you know, it's like he's exhausted and you can't believe he's pulled it off. That's actually one of the things watching it this time through that really stood out to me was you realize now when you watch it as you're older, like the stakes that they set up, that this is the guy that's going to have to do it, and why it's so remarkable that he actually pulls it off. Whereas a kid, I don't even think I thought about it. As a kid, I was like, well, of course he's going to pull it off. He's the hero of the movie. Like, what kind of movie would this be if he didn't? But then as an adult, you're like, he didn't have to be able to pull it off. He could have just died. Like, and if this wasn't this movie, they could have just killed him.
But he does pull it off, of course, and, you know, the hostages are safe. Part of Alcatraz gets wrecked, but nobody, you know, the bad guys are gone. Mason gives Goodspeed the location of his, the intelligence that he got thrown in jail for life. Because if I was Goodspeed, I don't think I'd go get it, because I know if I get caught, I'm getting thrown in a hole for life.
Well, it's been a long time since I've said thank you to anybody. But thank you.
I also love that, you know, Goodspeed basically lets Mason off the hook, says... So
where's Mason? Vaporized. Blown out to sea.
And then John Spencer just being completely... I want to see his body. I love John Spencer. He was such a great actor.
Vaporized? A body can vaporize?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely, sir.
We end with Mason back in the world, hopefully reunited with his daughter. And Stanley now, one of my favorite last lines of any movie ever, which is,
"Honey, you wanna know who really killed JFK?"
I've said before, I think that The Rock is the best 90s action movie, but there's a lot of competition. There really is. It is definitely top 5, probably top 3. Any given day, I might say it is still the best. But of all of the 90s action, what do you think is the one thing that's just like, this makes it stand out?
Well, it's hard when you say 90s action because it includes movies from both 91 and 99. So you have T2 and The Matrix both in there, which is that's like a really tough barometer. You're dealing with different types of movies.
Yeah.
So for this genre, and Point Break, which is like my favorite ever, this genre of action, I think you have to say it's like top 3. You know, you're comparing this movie probably more to a Point Break, more to a Speed, a Con Air, a Face Off. That's like the movies that this is more sort of in line with. You know, for that type of movie, it's the best, or it's close to it. If it's not the best, it's like this. And I mean, personally, I love Point Break. If you're talking about like impactful and like memorable action movies, I don't know how you can really put this ahead of Matrix or T2, because that's like 2 of the most important movies ever made. But I also find this movie to be rewatchable in a way that almost none of the rest of the ones I just mentioned is, like, or are. Rewatching it last night for what felt like maybe the 30th or 40th time, I just couldn't believe how into it I was. Every sequence, every second, the music is perfect. It's like, I used to work with a bartender whose brother, I think, did the music or assisted on the music for this movie, and I remember he was like, they watched the first cut of the movie, and like, you know, it didn't have the music yet, and Bay said to him, like, I need this movie to be exciting in every frame. From the second the credits start until the second the credits roll, I need this movie to be exciting always, which is like why I think you just have that dun 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 just going the whole time. I mean, it's very similar to Pirates of the Caribbean. It's got a lot of Pirates of the Caribbean in it. You know, it's very similar to a lot of those other Hans Zimmer late 90s, early 2000s scores. There's just similar elements, but I also think that the switch between those moments and the big sweeping like stuff that's playing behind the shower room shootout and the stuff that's playing in the sequence at the funeral, or not the funeral, the graveyard at the beginning. Like and then there's that weird flute thing they go to a couple times. It's what starts playing at the end when he's talking to him or when he's talking to Jade.
It's almost like Lord of the Rings. Almost. Yeah, it's very weird. It's very hobbity.
Yeah, it's really hobbity.
Is this what I think it is? Mason?
This is something that I always like to ask guests. If there's somebody that comes up to you and says, "Oh, I've never seen The Rock," what do you tell them to convince them to watch it?
Well, it's funny you say this because I have a friend of mine right now he's in a big action movie kick. He's my best friend since or one of my best friends since we were little kids. He found our podcast recently. He's been going through and watching episodes of the podcast. He's going down the list of the movies we covered. And today I was on the phone and I was like, "Have you seen The Rock? I'm talking about it later today." And he's like, "No, should I watch it?" And I was like, "Yeah, like a sweet general who was was supervising a bunch of soldiers that died behind enemy lines, takes over Alcatraz with 81 hostages to try to restore some money to their families. Nic Cage and Sean Connery have to do an underwater incursion to try to take back the island to eliminate San Francisco getting blown up by a crazy chemical weapons rocket." And he's like, "That sounds insane." I was like, "Yes, it is insane."
I mean, we're it's part of like as you get older as a movie fan, like we take for granted that people know what The Rock is. This movie's 25 years old. Like that's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, this is the quick Schmoedown corner, but you and I obviously compete in the Schmoedown, and one of the things that you talk about all the time when you get asked about a movie in the show is, why are they writing about that movie? And it's like, there are these movies that we grew up with that seemed like when we were growing up, like they were these iconic, standard, essential movies. But the more years that pass, if there's not some reason for that movie to be back on the radar, if it's not like coming up because there's a TV show or a remake or that actor's having a renaissance, certain movies that we grew up thinking, this is just like a movie that everyone will see forever, they just fall out of the consciousness. I think we were talking about Hunt for Red October recently. Like when I was growing up, Hunt for Red October was like The Rock. It was a movie that everybody loved and saw and talked about all the time. No one talks about the Hunt for Red October anymore. That movie is just, it's a relic of the early 90s that like is still great, but it's by no means The Rock. It isn't, I'm trying to think like movies that are a little later. It's not even, it's like not the Fast and the Furious. Like the Fast and the Furious 1 is 55 times more significant than Hunt for Red October, and Hunt for Red October is 55 times the movie.
That is very true. 55 times just about everything. Because there weren't, Jack Ryan died out. You've got the John Krasinski show, but people aren't going to go back to a movie with Alec Baldwin in it. But yeah, it is crazy to see the canon evolve and what people remember, what people don't remember. This is the kind of stuff, Ben, that you talk about all the time. Tell people about number one, where they can find you, also about Action Industries and the kind of stuff that you talk about over there.
Yeah. Andrew Guy and I, we did a podcast for a long time called Action Movie Anatomy. We're not doing that podcast now, but we do streams and talk about movies all the time over on Action Industries. That's really, really fun. We have a bunch of cool stuff coming up over there. And then I'm not sure exactly when this is coming out, but on the 28th of June, the second song from my upcoming solo album as a musician is actually coming out, which I'm really excited about. I just go by my own name, but you can find all that stuff over at youtube.com/nerdsinsuits, and I'll be on tour in the winter, November, flying all over the U.S., playing shows. So I'm really looking forward to that as well.
Awesome. Well, partner, we talk a lot, you and I. We'll be back on the phone / video. I say the phone because I'm old and everything is the phone to me. But we'll be studying up for the Schmoedown. I pray for the day when we get a 5-pointer and it's in the category of Ed Harris and it's this deep cut rock question that we both know.
Oh my God.
That would be amazing. But you can see both of us on the Schmoedown. The season is far from over. Lots of stuff coming up. We may well have, Ben, you're one victory away. We may well have a head-to-head match coming up very soon.
Third time. It's possible. Yeah. I gotta take down Ethan Irwin, which will be live coming up here in about a week. So getting ready for that.
Big day for the dungeon if we can make that happen. But Ben, thanks for coming on the show. Always great to talk about a movie that we both love.
Yes, man. Thank you so much for the invite. This was a treat.
That was such a great discussion, and one of my favorite things to do is to talk movies with Ben Bateman. I know that we are competitors both alongside each other and occasionally against each other, but one of the things that I love doing is just talking about movies with the guy. He has an extensive knowledge, as his Schmoedown history will prove, and it was so much fun breaking down The Rock with Ben. The Rock opened on June 7th, 1996, topping, among other movies, last week's subject of this show, Mission Impossible, another film featuring Sean Connery, but only his voice, Dragonheart, Twister, which we talked about on the show a few weeks ago, and the Billy Zane superhero movie, The Phantom. Despite mixed critical reviews, Gene Siskel gave it a mixed thumbs down, while Roger Ebert gave it 3.5 out of 4 stars. The Rock was a financial success, and it ended up with just over $130 million.
Now, all that stands between a city and a disaster is a man who's never seen combat.
You're a chemical freak.
And another who's been out of action for 30 years.
The Rock added another $200 million internationally to bring the gross up to just over $333 million worldwide off of a reported $75 million budget. And both domestic and worldwide, if you don't adjust for inflation, it is also Sean Connery's second highest grossing film of all time, behind Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade. The Rock was nominated for 1 Academy Award for Best Sound. It lost to the eventual Best Picture winner, The English Patient, and it also won the coveted MTV Movie Award for Best On-Screen Duo for Connery and Cage. It's also just one of my favorite movies all time to watch. It's a great movie for any occasion. I've played it on birthdays. I've played it at parties. I've played it just on nights when I need a pick-me-up. I love The Rock. I hope you love The Rock too. And if this was your first experience with the movie, seek it out. It really is a great little time capsule of what 90s action filmmaking was all about. Thank you so much for watching this episode about The Rock. We're going to be wrapping up 90s Action Month next week. It's actually going to be an archive episode, so if you're an audio listener, you've heard this episode before at the very beginning of this year. If you're watching us on YouTube, this episode has actually never been uploaded to this YouTube channel. It was uploaded to the show when it was over on the Schmoedown Entertainment Network, but we are going to be releasing an archive show, Air Force One, starring Harrison Ford. This was one of my favorite episodes that we did going into that show. So if you want to relive that, or if you're a watcher here on this channel and you have not seen the Air Force One episode, you can look forward to that next week. We'll be back with all new episodes in 2 weeks, right as we kick off the month of July. Thank you so much for watching. As I mentioned before, if you're listening to us and you want to see the audio, you can see it on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/DanMurrellMovies. And if you are watching us and you want to hear the audio version, you can subscribe to the audio podcast right down there in the description below. I'll be back next week with the archive episode on Air Force One, but until then, it's time to go back on the shelf. See you next time.